great to have you. Great to have you here today.
It's really good to be back. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, well, I want to ask a little bit about your journey from Valpo forward, but just for the folks in the room, a couple of notes. You're the president and CEO of Upbring, which is formerly Lutheran Social Services of the South, based in Austin, Texas. And you have acquired expertise as the president and CEO of this $70 million annual budget organization, really quite extraordinary, as a corporate attorney, political consultant, university administrator, right?
Right.
Yeah, Concordia, Austin, which is also the home institution of Tom Seidel here. You also serve as a member of the board of a Fortune 300 company?
Used to.
Used to.
Yes,
okay.
and it's Thriving Financial.
Thriving Financial,
Right.
Very important organization, and a national religious nonprofit organization and national foundation.
Yes, so I'm also vice chair of the In-Faith Community Foundation in Minneapolis, as well as on the board of directors of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
So, when you graduated from here in 1981, this is probably not what you thought was going to be your autobiography, right? What were you thinking about when you were a senior? What were you thinking you were going to do? And what was the first thing that happened to you that suggested you might take a different path?
Yeah. You know, it's been a journey, and I think we all go through a journey. And I think part of the journey, and it was probably later in life than should have been for me, is to really intentionally think about your vocation, your calling. So I came from a family where every single person for generations was either a farmer or a church worker. And I knew I didn't want to be a church worker, right? And I knew I had absolutely no talent in being a farmer. And so, you know, in high school I had this wonderful teacher who taught me about accounting. And so when I got to Valparaiso University, I'll major in accounting. That was fun. And while I was at Valparaiso University, I had a wonderful instructor from the community who taught business law. And that got my interest maybe going to law. But I think when I'm completely honest with myself, it's probably more for prestige and maybe the opportunity to make money than for anything else was the reason I wanted to go to law school. And you know, God works in so many mysterious ways, right? So even though maybe practicing law in Chicago for a few years wasn't my calling, it still allowed me an opportunity to get a great background for maybe prepare for other callings. And also, it's a long story, but there was actually a woman placed in my life just by happenstance where I literally saved her life. And it probably would not have happened if I wasn't practicing law as an attorney. And so, you know, even though maybe you do things for the wrong reasons, there's always reasons, right? Then I really got excited about politics and worked for a number of campaigns in the state, and then also for those who were not too young around this table, Governor Mike Dukakis, who ran for president in 1988 and lost. But after that campaign, and you know, if he'd won, I was intent on going to Washington, D.C. He lost. But in the meantime, I started discerning, you know, how does a politician and have both a successful professional life and a personal life? And I didn't see many role models out there that were able to do both well. So I then on a journey went to University of Texas and thought that maybe I'll teach and write about politics, and was working on a PhD in government at the University of Texas. When first I got married, and you know, when you're single and in grad school, all you need enough money for is a hamburger and a beer. When you're married, you need a little bit more. And so my wife encouraged me to reach out to Concordia University, Texas. It was Concordia College at the time. And it just so happened they needed an administrator. And, you know, so then that's probably where the first time I intentionally began thinking about my calling. And I credit professors that were there that for the first time I saw people weave their professional life into their personal life, and who they were was 24/7 as opposed to maybe separating their work life from their weekend or church life. And that really was appealing to me. And the other, you know, one of the neat things about being Lutheran is our perspective on vocation, where your family and your professional and your community and your congregation vocations are all equally important. And so it was a way to figure out how to weave that. So, thinking I was going to be in academia for the rest of my life because I really was enjoying my time there. Again, God has different plans. And out of the blue, Lutheran Social Services of the South at the time called and wanted me to interview for a chief operating officer position. I did. I became intrigued by their mission, decided that was a good opportunity for me to leave, and long story short, a couple of years later, I was asked to be CEO, and I'm now on my 20th year of being CEO, and I keep trying to leave, and for some reason, my calling does not allow me to. I'm probably there for a while. So in some ways, though, your calling's not up to you, right? It's up to the Lord, the board, and my wife, Lori.
So the very concept of calling really emerged when you were at the University of Texas in Austin.
Yeah.
That's when you first heard that term. So it wasn't so much in your Lutheran upbringing or in your life here that you began to separate out the idea of a career from the idea of a calling.
Yeah, no, there's some truth to that, although there's one story I remember well. My dad was telling somebody in church that his young son was not going to be a church worker, but rather he was going to be an attorney. And the comment the gentleman made at church I thought was really interesting. He says, well, the world needs an ethical attorney more than it needs another church worker. Mm. And so to me, that was a really interesting insight about how all of our vocations are equally important. And that it's not necessarily what we do, but as I'll talk about this evening, it's really how well we've served those who've been placed in our path. And again, it's, this idea of not only am I called to serve Upbring well, but I'm also called to equally as important serve my family well, and maybe my community and my congregation. And then the 24, the $1 million question is, how do you do that?
Are you going to give us the answer to that $24 million question?
You got to buy the book, The Calling, and then get the answer. No, but, so here's the beauty of this. Because of grace, we're forgiven, right? And so every day is that opportunity to start over. So every day is a brand new calling. And in many ways, it doesn't matter what we did yesterday. We have a friend at Concordia University in Texas who, long time ago, was involved in a motorcycle accident and became paralyzed. And so his calling shifted dramatically from a musician in the city of Austin to ultimately working at Concordia University in Texas. And he didn't choose that calling, right? But what he realized is that maybe despite either a mistake he or somebody else made in that accident, that he now had an opportunity for a brand new calling. And so, as I'm a big believer in disappointments, recessions, illnesses, there are all opportunities to discover your new calling. And I love the quote from Martin Luther, the opportunity to work out the salvation in your own life.
Well, one of your clear callings has been as a teacher of leadership. You talk about service. We're the Institute for Leadership and Service, and we're a university that prepares students to lead and serve in church and society. You emphasize service as the verb in your work, but you have gone out and taught about leadership and written about leadership. Was there something in particular that happened or that you noticed that impelled you into that calling and made you feel that you really needed to help people think about faithful leadership?
It's really interesting in that it's now is 13, 14 years ago, but around the 2001 time frame, I think it was, we had just gone through reinventing Lutheran Social Services of the South and had some success, similar to what we're doing right now. And it was a feeling that I can't really describe to you, but I felt driven in some ways to write about this experience. And I didn't have a publisher. I'd never written a book before. And I've gotten rejected by a number of different publishers. And then finally a publisher says, yeah, we'll publish this book. And it was on executive values, a Christian approach to organizational leadership. And what was interesting to me is I wasn't sure why I was supposed to write this book. But as soon as I put the draft in and it got published, Enron hit, and a whole number of other bad things happened and hit at the same time, and it got a good review in the Dallas Morning News. And all of a sudden, it was very clear that part of my calling was to engage in conversations in various different groups about how ethics needs to be a part of leadership and the importance of that over the long term if you want to build long-term success in an organization. So, you know, there's a piece inside of you that you have to follow, your passion, your expertise, and sometimes you just got to trust that.
So it was your expertise in your role at Lutheran Social Services of the South that was part of what you wanted to write about.
Yes, and then as you look back on your life, and I'll talk about this a little bit tonight too, in some ways I learned more from some of the bad bosses I've had as opposed to some of the really good leaders, right? Because you learn not what to do. And then the other piece that I mentioned in a class earlier today with you is that as you look back on all the experiences in your life, both good and bad, I had a number of opportunities to write article after article after article for free, right? So whether it's a law journal or whether it's a PhD dissertation, et cetera, et cetera. But in many ways, that was, again, God preparing me for then that opportunity to be His servant in a realm outside of my day-to-day job. And I felt I'm not necessarily good at coming up to you and talking about my faith, but I am pretty good writing about it and then having an opportunity to maybe talk about it in a session